Okay, here we go. Caroline, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. All is well here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I know you're busy, but I wanted to obviously, I found out about you through, it was actually Keith who's been on the podcast a couple of times now, and he directed me towards some of the stuff that you put out, including your TED Talk. And I just thought the story was so amazing. And I thought it'd be great to just get you on the podcast. You can kind of share that story and I can poke some questions at you as well, because it's pretty inspiring. But before we get into that, would you mind just giving yourself a little bit of an introduction to some of the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Caroline, obviously. I am an Australian I would call myself like a health and fitness professional and enthusiast. And I love all things health and wellness. And I've been in the Middle East in Dubai for 11 years now. Yeah, that's kind of me to a T. Obviously, since then, a lot has transpired. Yeah.
Which we will get into, and obviously that's going to be a big part of it. But yeah, so obviously, and I know that you mentioned in some of the talks that you did that you just very active when you were growing up in terms of climbing mountains, surfing, doing all types of stuff, and that's kind of where you're at now in terms of like that health and fitness space.
Yeah, definitely. Like, it's interesting because a lot of Australians can relate to this facet, but growing up in Australia, you grow up with this mentality of always being outside, always being very active. On the weekends, we used to do this broad walk, which is like walking from Maroubra Beach all the way to Bondi, and it's like maybe about 15 kilometers, and you walk all along the coast, across cliffs, and then spending the days at the beach, swimming and doing nippers, which is like surf life saving, and just always been out and about. So you get this kind of very, very comfortable with being outdoors, very comfortable with exercise, and then just this also very arrogant, fearless, I can do anything, nothing's ever going to kill me, like mentality. So, and I'm sure a lot of Australians can relate to that. It's just, I think it's embedded in who we are.
Yeah, that's awesome. And obviously, like I mentioned before, your TED Talk titled "Ain't No Mountain High Enough," which is when you go in and listen to it. And I'm definitely going to tag it in the show notes so people can go and check it out for themselves. Is probably a perfect title for what it is. So let's get into that a little bit now. Obviously, you came over to Dubai. You've been here, what did you say, like 15 years? Something
11. I've been here 11 years now.
like 11
Mm-hmm.
years. And obviously, yeah, I mean, take it from where your TED Talk begins. I think it kind of tells its own story.
So it's actually 5 years ago now. I was climbing an outdoor rock climbing wall in Dubai in Jebel Ali, and I climbed all the way to the top with no harness, and I had taken my shoes off, and I climbed to the top because it was just very easy. I used to climb like scale walls like that in seconds, and not literally, but you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
yeah,
And yeah, I got to the top. I was listening to the call of prayer. I had my elbows over the top of the wall and just looking at the sunset. You know how beautiful the sunset is here. It's like this huge ethereal ball that just descends into the ocean. And I had this kind of weird feeling, and I was like, just completely disregarded it. And I was trying to figure out which way I was going to go down. And through the center of the wall, there was this iron cast like staircase. It was more like a ladder, and it was very dilapidated. And I was in my mind assessing, okay, should I climb? It was basically a beam, so two beams at the top, and I was looking through the center of the wall, looking down at the little ladder in the center. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to climb over this like 30 centimeter beam, suspended like 15 meters or whatever it was off the floor, and kind of crawl to the ladder and then cross this 1 meter gap and then go down. I was like, no, that's way too complicated. So instead I went down the same way I came up. So I just grabbed the inklet that was below me and I started descending the wall. And a few seconds later, I think I was one or two inklets down, and I remember seeing the yellow kind of handle just come off, and I just fell. Yeah, and when I fell onto gravel and sand and stone, and I just shattered my entire body on the way down. Well, as I landed, and I think understanding the mechanics of it now. Basically, when I landed just slightly more on my right side, and so everything broke on my right side, and it actually disconnected my pelvis from the rest of my body. So my right leg disconnected, and then it had moved up my rib cage by maybe about an inch or two. And then my pelvis shattered into who knows how many pieces, and my foot and my whole leg moved up into a space that it really never should be in. And then my spine also just went.
You have
And
you have any
sorry.
idea how high it was that you fell approximately?
Look, I'm not entirely sure. I have gone back to the wall once, and in the ambulance report, they basically said that I was between 8 to 12 meters off the floor. But we were in such a, I don't know, when you get into situations like that, that assessing things like that, but just becomes
Irrelevant.
the not important. Yeah, totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
It was when they asked me how high were you. So when the ambulance arrived, I was just like, I was almost at the top, and that was it. And I'm not sure. I have gone back since, and the wall is about like 10 to 14 meters, but I'm not entirely sure. And I was close to the top, but not at the very top. So yeah.
That's really interesting what you said as you were explaining that as well, that now you know a little bit more. You went back and looked at that situation and you're thinking about the mechanics of what actually happened and how you might have felt. Obviously that wasn't something that went through your mind like probably until years after you sustained it.
Well, look, it's all when things like that happen, you really work out of instinct, and it's just instinctually what you do. You don't have a lot of time to think, oh, I have 1 second where I'm suspended in the air. It was a flash. I fell in a second and a half, really. And in that second and a half, you don't assess, oh, I need to land this way because that's going to be the safest. You just land. And so fortunately for me, I actually landed on my feet as opposed to landing on my back or my head. And yeah, that was it. And I guess from that point onwards, everything else was very much instinctual. I rolled onto one of my sides, and I had this feeling as I was rolling that all of the bones in my pelvis were moving separately. I just felt them go doom, 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 doom. And I remember going, oh, that's not meant to happen. And then I rolled to the other side and I felt the same thing. And I initially rolled onto the right side, and I just had this feeling like I couldn't lay on my right side. And obviously it was completely smashed. And so I rolled onto the other side. And once I got to my left, I just stayed there almost in a fetal position. And I just stayed there. And I think I waited about 30 to 45 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. And I remember just being very thirsty, really thirsty. It was the only thing that was going through my mind, and just being really calm. Like you would expect, you see these scenes in movies where people have accidents and they scream and they cry and they call for help and they get all dramatic. And it was actually completely the opposite. I was really calm. I even remember saying to my friend, like, you need to call the ambulance. And then some of the staff around came to me. I don't remember what they were saying or what was happening, but I just remember saying to somebody that I needed water. And then I was just breathing, and I was just literally breathing and listening to my own heartbeat and just waiting. And it felt like I was there for years, but like 45 minutes.
Yeah, and that's so frightening. And even just, I guess, just thinking about that, well, that's good timing for that. Okay, the podcast probably heard the doorbell go in the background there. That's the joys of being, I guess, unfortunate timing, but just one of those things. Anyway, what I was going to say was obviously just sounds like such a frightening experience. And when I've heard you mention it, before about you literally shattered your body or broke your body. And, you know, people might break their leg or, you know, break a couple of bones in their legs or arms and talk about breaking their body. But you quite literally, and when you listed off all of the injuries that you sustained, you quite literally broke your body, right?
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because even in my scans of my feet, like when I say it, it's I broke the calcaneum really, but it wasn't like it's a fracture where one bone has a little like fracture line to it or it splits into, it actually just crumbled. And so all of the calcaneum itself had no shape or form anymore. And so when I had it reconstructed, I literally had about 20 to 30 fragments of bone actually put back together. And there's an image that I've shared on Instagram a lot. It's of my foot, and it's basically this plate with about 20 screws, and they're screwing each of the separate bones together. And so it's quite interesting recovering from something like that, because although it's one bone, the fact that it lost its shape and form, and it was also different to the other side, means that when it gets reconstructed, it's reconstructed in a very different way. So it's a different shape from what it used to be. It's a different shape from the other side. And then the shape of that bone itself means that it functions differently. So your gait, the just little things like where you hold your balance, everything was different. And the same thing with my pelvis and my spine. So learning to walk after that is so challenging. And to be honest with you, so when you shatter your calcaneum, basically in order to get the plate on the bone, they have to strip the bone of its muscle attachments. And so your muscles, they just don't know how to work anymore. And predominantly with my pelvis, the thing that I had after is that once it was reconstructed, it was like, oh great, my pelvis is back together, but nothing around it works. None of the ligaments and tendons that used to hold it together, they were just completely torn. So they didn't have any role to play anymore. And all of the muscles that used to be able to control movements of my leg, they had no idea how to work. Even to this day, I know that because I had part of my spine replaced, and it's replaced with this artificial cage, the attachment to like my hip flexors, so your psoas, that's just not there anymore. And so my hip flexors on the right side, they just work very differently. So little things like that people don't consider, like it takes so much time. And one thing that I really learned from this whole process is really how long it takes to heal. I thought like, oh great, I'm reconstructed. And even actually when I left hospital, they signed off a you don't have to go back to work for 6 months. And I was like, great, this is the longest like sick leave I've ever had. But when that 6-month period came, I was still in a wheelchair, and I still had just learned how to stand up, and I could stand for maybe 2 seconds, and my leg couldn't work and my feet didn't know how to move. And so it's a very interesting recovery, and it takes a very long time, and it's very taxing mentally, really.
Yeah, I
But
think I wanted to really give it like that context of just how bad your injuries were, because I don't want to dwell on it too much, because I actually think the rest of your story is really inspiring, and that's what I want to kind of share. But I think it's important to look back at where you were, and like you just said there, you were in a wheelchair after 6 months and you still weren't able to walk, and you really had to like completely start again. So where did your journey take you then? Obviously you must have had some short, kind of medium, long-term goals in to begin with, in terms of just getting yourself back to walking. Where did that lead you into what you accomplished in the end?
to be honest, initially it's so funny. Initially, the goal that I had was I was just trying to make it through every day. Every day was a huge challenge, both mentally and physically. Physically, I couldn't do anything. I was completely bedbound. And so things like having a shower, it's like, okay, well, to have a shower, I have to like press the button on my hospital bed that I eventually had a hospital bed at home. We converted my whole living room into like hospital, it's like, okay, I need to sit up in my hospital bed. And that in itself, when you're completely broken, like I could sit up for like 5 minutes and then everything would start to ache. And I had made this, obviously I have a Bachelor of Medical Science, so I know a lot about the medical jargon. And so after I left hospital, I really started to read all the clinical studies and the trials and everything that was happening with people that had injuries similar to mine. So I couldn't really find anybody that had everything, but I found, you know, people with bilateral calcaneum fractures, and then that were reconstructed, and the type of surgeries, and then the same thing with my pelvis, and then the same thing with my spine, and looked at the mortality and morbidity of them. And most of these people ended up severely disabled. And most of them couldn't walk again, and they were either disabled and in a lot of pain for the rest of their life. And after reading all of that information, I was like, okay, well, that's not what I want. So I don't want to fit into that like statistic. So what do I need to do to step out of that statistic and do something different? And so I started reading a lot of very different wellness books, so to speak. Like I got really into Joe Dispenza and Evolve Your Brain and You Are the Placebo. And those two books really helped me understand the power that your mind has in shaping your recovery and in shaping what the perception of what you're going to do after is. So if I plant this little seed in my mind, which the doctors already did, you're not going to walk again. You know, just that little seed, that thought in your mind, the manifestation of that is I'm not going to walk again. So for me, it was like, okay, well, how do I plant different seeds? And at that stage in my recovery, my mental framework was just so weak that I started to listen to a lot of very positive information that was out there, whether it was like I was listening to audiobooks, and I was listening to podcasts, and I was listening to other people who had similar injuries. I think I started following every paraplegic like athlete that you could think of on Instagram. I just wanted to find people that had a lot of trauma, physical trauma, and that overcame it to some degree. So really the first phase of my recovery and healing and all of that was just literally, how do I feed my mind good things so I change the outcome? And then after that, I started doing ridiculous things. Like I would get my wheelchair, I would get into my hospital bed, and I would practice rolling onto my side and then rolling on my back and then rolling on the other side, counting 10 seconds. I can stay on my broken side for 10 seconds, roll onto my back, sleep for 10 hours. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to sit up. I'm going to sit up for 5 minutes. And I made a very conscious decision that I wasn't going to take any pain medication once I left hospital, because I read a study that along with the addictive qualities of pain medication and what they do to your brain, there was a lot of research that showed that actually it slows down bone regeneration. So I was like, okay, no, so I did everything cold turkey, which was a good and a bad thing, because you kind of, it's shit. It's really shit. Like you're in a lot of pain a lot of the time. But then at the same time, you really start to learn and understand your body. Oh, like my body doesn't like this, or this is okay. And then you become very tolerant of the level of pain that you're at and what actually alleviates it and what makes it better. And I've really learned about my feet to such a degree, because they were the thing that healed the slowest, and the thing that hurt the most. My feet really, even to this day, if I do a 10K walk, I can't, my feet are in agony. So learning and understanding, okay, how much can I push my feet was a big parameter of that. And then literally, so it was just every day was like that. And eventually my goal was like, I want to walk. And so I would see myself walking in my mind, and then I was doing everything that I could to get to that place. So it was like hydrotherapy, or I started crawling a lot, actually. So I would get on the floor and try and crawl to the other end, because my right leg didn't work. Even just being in all fours was challenging. So things like that. It was a slow process, and that took years. And then it was like, okay, my goal is like, I'm going to walk 100 meters. And I have some stories that I've told some people about times where I was like, okay, I can do this. I would order a taxi. The taxi would come pick me up. I'd get my crutches. I'd get into the taxi. They'd take me to Dubai Mall or to MOE because I wanted to feel like a normal human being and go sit and have a coffee. And I'd get out of the taxi, and just walking 100 meters to like a coffee shop was like, I'd be sweating by the time I got there and in so much pain that like I would start crying. I had one experience where this like really lovely guy found me outside the disabled bathrooms with crutches, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I can't walk," and I was in tears. And he was like, "Let me take you home." I was like, "It's okay, you can take me to the taxi stand." And eventually he carried me to his car and drove me home.
Wow.
That's how much, I don't even remember who this person was or their name, but it was just such a act of kindness. So I was very fortunate to always be pushing my own boundaries, but then exceed them a lot and just be met with so much kindness and people that would just see this person in agony and then to let me help you. So I was very fortunate to have that. But yeah, I was kind of always pushing my own boundaries. And I think what's interesting about the whole experience is that because I didn't take any pain medication, I really was okay with being in pain, and being in a significant amount of pain. And that in itself made me not afraid of it. So whenever I was in pain, I was like, oh, this is normal. I know what this means. Like, my feet are not happy. And then I know when I'd get to the point where it would just, standing on them would make me cry, then I was like, I have to go home. Like, I have to rest. And I know that if I rested for 5 hours or 6 hours or 10 hours or sleep for 3 days, then my feet would be better and I could push my boundaries again. So I did that for a very long time until eventually I did a 10K run. I think it was maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half, something along those lines. A year and a half to 2 years ago, I did a 10K run. I couldn't walk for 5 days after. Like, I couldn't actually stand up, but that was like, I did it. And then after that, I climbed Australia's highest mountain, which is the little mountain, Mount Kosciuszko. And yeah, 2Ks from the bottom, I couldn't walk anymore. My feet were in agony. I was like with my best friend, like crying. And I'm like, can you please call the ranger? And he's like, no, you call the ranger. And I was like, please. Eventually they called the ranger. The ranger picked us up and drove us down to the bottom of the mountain. But I couldn't walk anymore. And then when I got home, like back to Dubai from Sydney, I had this kind of idea that I'd been toying with in my own mind. And it was this idea of I don't want to be like this disabled person. And in my mind, I had been for a really long time. And it was really hard to get out of that mindset. Like, how do I get out of the mindset of I'm disabled and disfigured and like that kind of thing that you set for yourself? And it was a real challenge, and I wanted to do something that would mark like, okay, if I can do this, I'm no longer disabled. Because I had gotten so attached to it. Like, I'd gotten like, oh, I can't walk, so I have to park here, or oh no, I can't go to an exercise class, or I would go to yoga classes and I knew that I couldn't do half the stuff in there. So I'd tell the teacher at the beginning, and then I would kind of hide. And I would hide in all exercise fitness scenarios where I never used to be like that. And I would hide because I was like, oh no. Firstly, I was disfigured, like all my feet, my pelvis, everything looked different. It was a weird shape and it didn't work properly. So nothing worked well. So that was interesting. So I decided in my head, sorry for rambling,
No,
I was gonna
carry on. It's good.
do something amazing. And I had no idea what I was gonna do. So I was looking on the Guinness World Record website and I was like, oh, I was trying to find things that were really easy to do. So I was like, oh, there's someone that walked barefooted from this distance. And I toyed with the idea. So I spoke to my husband about it and I was like, what do you think about like walking this? He's like, are you crazy? He's like, you can't even walk with shoes on like 5 kilometers and you want to walk with no shoes on across like a state? He's like, you're mental. And so I was trying to find different things. And my friend was like, okay, why don't you climb all the mountains in a region? And someone had already done all the mountains in Europe. And I was like, that's a lot of countries. Someone had done all the mountains in Africa. I was like, that takes way too long, like 50 countries. I'm not doing that. And then I was like, well, you know, I live in the Middle East. So why don't I do all the mountains in the Middle East? And then that idea it was like a little seed that I planted. And then I just pushed the seed off the mountain and it just avalanched and it just kept growing and growing and growing. And then before I knew it, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, whether the universe helps me or not. And every single step along the way, I just had people that were hearing what I was doing and then supporting that idea. So before I knew it, I got sponsored by DHL and they were helping me logistically go to like some of the most dangerous countries in the world. Because I don't know how silly I was. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Iraq alone and I'm going to go to Iran during this tension that was happening between the US and Iran at the time. Yeah, I'm going to go there. I'm going to go to Yemen. It hadn't like really sunk in what I was doing. And then Golf for Good helped me with a lot of the training. So I started training a lot, and I knew that in February I couldn't even climb a 2,000 meter mountain, and I had to be able to climb a 6,000 meter mountain in 7 months. So I started doing a lot of training and really a lot of walking, and the walking was just for my feet, because my feet, you know, prior to that, they weren't able to walk more than 5 kilometers without being in a lot of pain. So I needed to get them to a place where I could walk 10 Ks and be okay the next day. And so I just incrementally started walking more and more and more every day, and then going to the gym and stair climbing and lots of other things. And by September last year, I attempted to create a new Guinness World Record, and by summiting all the mountains in the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. And yeah, I did. I didn't complete it because I don't know if you know anything about the politics of the region and the political.
I probably know about as much as you knew before you did it. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it, the organization. But I even just think just the process of climbing a mountain, like I've personally never done it, and it's something that I would like to do at some point. But just the process, there's so much more that goes into it than just, you know, just the base fitness level of climb a mountain. Plus you've got all of the provisionary things that you had to go through in terms of training your body back up to be able to, you know, handle those distances, handle that kind of volume of training as well. It's remarkable.
Yeah, it was mostly like I needed to get my body to a normal person standard first,
Yeah.
and then be able to climb a mountain. So yeah, look, it was amazing. It was the most amazing thing that I ever did, and it was so beautiful. I learned a lot. Like I am someone who actually loves politics, and so I've been very interested in the Middle East for a long time. And it's a region that I love, and I'd been to most of the countries in this region prior to climbing these mountains. And for me, it was just a different way to experience them. So I went back to Syria again. I went obviously to Lebanon again. I went to Jordan, to Egypt, to Iraq, Iran, which those were 2 countries that I hadn't been to: Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, obviously the UAE. I went to Saudi Arabia for the first time, it was really beautiful. And one of the most beautiful things about doing that was, one, as someone who's lived here for a long time, really getting to know the region in a different way, because you see it scenically as opposed to like a city holiday. And then being able to see how generous and beautiful and lovely people are. Like I had a lot of problems in climbing the mountain in Iraq because it's actually in a very dangerous area. And prior to attempting to do that, everyone was just so supportive. But when I got to Iraq, I wasn't able to climb the mountain for other reasons. And I remember going to lunch with some Iraqis, and they were like, "You have to try Iraqi food." So they ordered everything, every Iraqi dish that you could ever think. And I was like, "Guys, like, I can't eat this much food." So it's so beautiful to see like Middle Eastern hospitality. Whereas like if you go to Australia as a tourist, they're like, "Oh, like, do your own thing, like, get out of my way." But if you go anywhere in the Middle East, people are just so lovely and generous. And I had so many people just being amazing. Even in Iran, I remember climbing the mountain, and when I finished climbing Mount Damavand, I was honestly just beat. Like, that mountain took everything that I had. I got to the summit and I broke down and crying, and I spent the whole time on the summit bawling my eyes out because it was so hard. And I got sulfur poisoning, and by the time I started climbing down, my back was spasming and I couldn't feel, like, my feet were just, my body was falling apart. And I got to the base of the mountain. I remember this guy putting me in this car with my guide, and he was like, "Is she okay?" And I was just beat, like completely beat. And I was in the back of his car crying, and like my feet were in agony. And that mountain, it just took it out of me. But it was an amazing experience to push yourself that much, and then to kind of understand what you're capable of, and then to think, well, really, we don't really have any limits but the limits that we set for ourselves. So how far can I push myself? What else can I do? And you don't do it for other people, but you do it to train your own mind, and then to give yourself like a sense of purpose, something to work towards, something to do. And hopefully, in me doing that, it helps other people kind of aspire to do the same thing in their own lives, to just live the best version of their life that they can, and not be afraid of anything. So, like, with measure, though.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up really nicely then. And I just wanted to take it, one of the things that you first said after I asked you about, your short, medium, long-term goals, stuff like that. I'm so glad that you actually stopped, you went before that and said, hang on, first thing that I did was I needed to get my mind straight. Had all of these things going against me, all of this stuff that I'd read and, researched on was saying the chances are against you. And you managed to obviously worm your way through and find a position where you could promote those positive thoughts. And I just thought it was really interesting, because how relatable is that for people, even for someone who wants to get in shape, right? Just that, rather than going to a gym and, smashing the gym 5 days in a row and trying to clean up their nutrition, why don't you just spend a couple of weeks just actually, it sounds a bit kind of like wishy-washy, like visualizing and things like that, but you're a perfect example of that. Like, you needed to get your mind in order before, and you put that, you get into where you are now, down to a lot of that, the mindset stuff.
Yeah, do you know, to be honest with you, more than any physical training that I did, because I did a lot of physical training towards the end of my recovery. And look, I'm still in recovery, like I'm still healing, and there are still things that I'm working on. And even to this day, feeding my mind good things is one of the most important facets. And I say this to a lot of my friends. Like, when I got out of the hospital, for about 23 hours of the day, I was asleep. And then for that 1 hour that I was awake, I was in like mud. Like, my mind was just literally in the gutter. And for anyone out there who suffers from depression or from any kind of mental health issues, it really is the most challenging thing when your mind is in a very dark place. And to be able to get out of that dark place, I just started listening to everything that I could, to the point where it got obsessive. Like, I was listening to stuff every single moment that I was awake, because the second that I took my earphones off, I was back down here. Like, I can't do this. Like, I'm never going to walk again. Like, what do I think that I'm doing? Like, this is ridiculous. I'm disabled. Who's going to love me like this? Like, it just, like, that comes into your mind. And then I'd be like, okay, like, headphones back on, watching and listening and feeding my mind good things. And I kind of akin it, this is the best way I can describe it. It's like, you have this darkness, so this voice that talks to you about all the things that you can't do. And then you have this voice that's very quiet because it's mostly silent. And that voice is like, oh, this is a good idea. Like, you could do that. And it says it once and that's it. And then this voice talks all the time. So it's literally about recognizing, oh, okay, I have this duality that exists within me. And if I listen to this voice and I give this voice the microphone, I'm not going to go anywhere. Like, the only place I'm going to go is exactly where I am right now, which is not a good place. But if I start to turn the volume up on this voice, and I start to feed this voice, and I turn the volume down on this voice and just ignore it, then I wonder where this voice is going to take me. Where is this side of my consciousness going to go? What could I do here? And both of those may be true. You may never be good enough or any of those things, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're good enough. It just matters what you perceive and what you give the microphone to. So I was like, okay, well, I acknowledge the fact that I'm disabled. I acknowledge the fact that I may never climb the mountain. I may never walk. But if I believe that reality, then I am going to always be those things. But if I try something different, then who knows where I'm going to go. So yeah, I just turn the volume down on that. And I turned the volume down to such a degree that I got really good at ignoring that. And then I just turned the volume up on, oh, I can do this, or maybe I should try this, and then what else is going to get me in that direction. And even to this day, when I start to feel like the volume is getting turned up on the other side, I'm like, ooh, like I go back and start feeding my mind good things. And it's a constant battle. And yeah, I think it's like, okay, if I've got two roads, and the road less traveled is this way, which is unlike the clinical studies, unlike the trials, or the studies of all of the other people that have had my injuries. If I walk this path, what could I do? And I wanted to live. So I did that, but it's a lot of work. Like, what's interesting about this journey is that people think, one, that healing is quick, and it's not. And then they think, oh, I'm going to listen to a happy podcast now, and then I'm going to be fixed, or I'm going to take pain medication and everything's going to be fixed, or I'm going to have surgery and everything's going to be fixed. And it's not the case at all. You have to go to the gym every day. You have to listen to good things every day. You have to feed your mind good things every day. You have to work at it all the time, like every single second of every single day, until it becomes second nature. And only when it becomes second nature and it is embodied in your lifestyle, then you can go, okay, what else can I integrate into this? But it takes work. It takes a lot of work. And yeah, it's not always easy. Sometimes it's shit and it's hard, and you want this dark voice to get really loud because it's easy, and you can be the victim, and you can just lay in bed and cry, and people are going to feel sorry for you, and like a million other things. Yeah, that's.
I guess, yeah, that's some really good points. I kept coming up with things like to ask you, and then you kept answering them as you were going through. But I think, obviously, what I wanted to kind of wrap up of is where you're at now in terms of, listen, you might be facing other challenges and things that you're trying to do. Obviously, you've got your business, you've got other things going on in your life, but where are you kind of at in terms of, I guess, your own fitness level? Like, what does your day-to-day, I don't know, your training look like, your routine, and then obviously, you know, your work-life balance and stuff like that?
everything that I just said to you is still everything that I'm working on. I still, like, I have a goal that I have in mind. It's like, okay, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to do some exercise. And I have that plan to do from like 6:30 a.m. to like 8:30. So it's like 2 hours to meditate, to go exercise and to go for a walk. And a lot of the time I end up doing it all over the day. So my kind of routine is still working on all of the things I just said. Sorry, excuse me. I try and exercise every day. I try and do things that I love. So like I love hiking and I like walking. Walking's easy because I'm not in a lot of pain after. And I like being outside. So I try and do the things that make me happy and that make my mind feel really good. And so if like, it's quite interesting. The human system it's like a cake, right? It's like a recipe. You know that in every cake you have to put flour, water, and eggs and sugar, so to speak. It's the same thing. Like if you want to do anything in your life, like you have to be out in nature, like you have to get sunlight. It's just, I can't tell you what it does for you. And you have to walk and you have to drink water and you have to exercise and you have to feed your mind, you have to feed your body. So it's like you're making a cake, and then like the icing is what you do in your life. So I'm still working on trying to get the cake together every, like walk, sunlight, do things that make me happy. So that's where I'm at. I have literally, so during the coronavirus lockdown, I kind of turned into a slob. Like whilst everybody else was training 50 times a day, doing home workouts, I was just like, completely lazy. So now that all of that's out of the way and we're not imprisoned in our own homes, I'm starting to train for the next thing that I'm doing. So I have a year before I do that. So it's, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll be listening out for that one whenever you announce it. Okay, let's wrap it up. It's been great to talk with you. Just one last point is, obviously from your background in terms of your studies and things like that, going through your injuries, I know a big part of what you do now with a life of education is through life of education is obviously health and fitness into a portal for people to go on and learn about different aspects and qualifications and that type of stuff. That came from you realizing that there wasn't a lot out there already through your journey, right?
Yeah. It was interesting because when I was, and look, Dubai is very different to some of the other cities out there, but I was looking for rehab specialists here because even though I have a lot of knowledge when it comes to rehab, and I did a lot of my own rehab, at the same time, it's nice to have somebody there with you because motivating yourself. And for me, I was trying to find someone who was going to motivate me because, like, trust me, life is just so much easier when you're holding someone's hand and like you can rely on them to help you. And I needed actually all the help I could take. So I have no problem asking for help left, right, and center. But even then, like I did a lot of my own rehab, and when I went out, I was trying to find someone who could supplement that. And in Dubai, there was a lot of people at the time, so this is also 5 years ago, that were on their Instagram profiles professing that they were rehab specialists. And when I went to go see them, I had some really shocking experiences. Like I think maybe a year after my recovery, I was still walking on crutches and my feet were completely in plates. And I remember going to this rehab specialist and he put me on a power plate. I don't know if you know power. So I got onto the power plates and my feet were just vibrating and I just started crying. And I just got this like visceral reaction to it. And it just made me feel so sick. And I just remember leaving and I never went back. And then I saw somebody else and they had me so remember I'm on crutches. So I had a chair, I'd sit on the chair and then I'd stand up and I was holding this weight. And as soon as I extended my arms out, I could just feel like the center of my back where I had my implant, it would just like, I just get this shooting pain in my spine. And then I was like, okay, no, I can't do this. And what was interesting is because I had the background, I kind of knew when I was seeing someone that didn't really know what they were doing, and they were pushing me a lot harder than what I could actually do. And then obviously, you know, Keith, I met Keith and he was like, oh, you actually can't walk without crutches. And I was like, yeah, my right leg, because my right leg was completely useless. I could stand on it, but it couldn't walk. So it couldn't do anything. So he was like, okay, why don't we try and actually get your right leg to work? So we would lay on my back and lift my legs to tabletop, and my right leg would just go thump to the floor, just collapse. And it was like, oh, okay. So when I met him, I was like, why are other people not realizing this? And so we came up with a life of education to see if we could take some of this rehab material and put it online and make it really affordable and accessible to people. Like we've got Oliver Blenkinsop, who is the course coordinator for the master's program of rehab, and he does a whole course on aloe, and some of his lectures, they're like $20. And to listen to somebody of that caliber and listen to him talking about pain and really understanding pain and the psychosomatic facet of it, and then understanding ligament injuries. And so we wanted to take some of the best people out there and put them on a platform and just make it affordable so that everybody out there could have access to this type of information.
And that's amazing being on the platform as well, because everything is always evolving, right? And there's always more to learn. So being able to get on a platform like yours, just to even update your knowledge, or, you know, find out a little bit something more about something that you weren't sure about before is great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Caroline, I'm not going to take any more of your time because this has been a great podcast. I'm sure everybody's going to enjoy this one. Just before you go, where can they find you if they want to get in contact or follow any of your stuff?
Yeah, so everything that I do is mostly on Instagram. I'm a bit of like what is the word? I don't like Instagram a lot. So now that I'm training for my next mountain challenge, which is like the Volcanic 7 Summits, I'm now going back on Instagram. But it's caroline.d.leon.
Okay. And then obviously a life of education on there as well.
Yeah, and a life of education.
Awesome. Thanks very much again for coming on.
No worries.